Did you know that in Greece, it's perfectly normal for a man to throw a plate at a wedding and not get arrested? Yep. In some parts of the country, particularly in older traditions, smashing plates is considered a way to celebrate joy, ward off evil spirits, or just express yourself a little too physically when the music is too good. Imagine trying that at a New York wedding. Chaos. But in Greece, it's all part of life. Colorful, chaotic, slightly dangerous, but somehow endearing. And that little slice of madness is a perfect introduction to the Greek people. Passionate, proud, stubborn, loving, and occasionally dramatic. Greece has a population of around 10.5 million people. But if you've ever spent time there, you'll know that the country feels much smaller. Everyone seems to know someone who knows someone. Families are tight knit, villages stick together, and even in Athens, the capital city of almost 4 million people, there's this strange sense of familiarity. Greeks value connection, they value family. And if you're invited to a Greek home, expect to be fed until you beg for mercy. And yes, they mean it literally. The phrase, "you will not leave hungry," is almost a threat. Greek society is built around the family, and not just the nuclear family. Grandparents, cousins, uncles, aunts, and sometimes the family dog get counted. Respect for elders is a serious deal. Older generations often live with or very close to younger relatives, and it's not unusual for several generations to share the same house. The family is both a support system and a kind of social pressure cooker. Everyone knows your business, and everyone has an opinion on how you should live your life. But that's part of the charm, really. Family bonds are strong, loyalty runs deep, and when Greeks say we look out for each other, they mean it. Religious traditions are equally central. Greece is overwhelmingly Eastern Orthodox Christian. About 90% of the population identifies as such. Religion isn't always strictly practiced, but it's deeply woven into cultural life. Churches are everywhere, on street corners, atop hills, even on tiny islands with only a handful of residents. Major religious festivals like Easter are national events. Easter in Greece is a big deal. Imagine citywide feasts, fireworks, and the smell of roasted lamb hanging in the air. And yes, people actually dye their eggs red in a ritual that symbolizes the blood of Christ before cracking them against each other's eggs in a friendly or aggressive, depending on your luck, competition. Cuisine. Food as culture. Now food. Oh, food. Greek cuisine is often romanticized, but the reality is just as wonderful with a few quirks. Greece has given the world dishes like moussaka, tzatziki, souvlaki, and Greek salad. But there's so much more beyond what you see on Instagram. Olive oil flows like water here. A traditional Greek household will almost certainly have a bottle of extra virgin olive oil that they use for everything, frying, drizzling, even in some extreme cases, breakfast toast. And feta cheese is not optional, it's a must. Street food culture is thriving too. Souvlaki vendors are everywhere, offering quick, delicious, meat on a stick options for hungry locals. And yes, Greeks do have a sweet tooth. Pastries like baklava, galaktoboreko, and loukoumades, essentially Greek donuts drenched in honey, are staples. But here's the twist. While they love indulgence, moderation is still culturally important. Meals are meant to be shared slowly, conversations are long, and finishing a plate too quickly can be considered rude, like you're rejecting the food and the person who made it. Language and expression Greek is one of the oldest written languages still in use today, with a history spanning over 3,000 years. Modern Greek may sound familiar to those who know classical Greek, but it's very much a living, evolving language. Greeks are expressive speakers. Conversations often involve dramatic hand gestures, raised voices, and emotional shifts that might be exhausting to outsiders, but are completely normal here. Humor is a huge part of language. Sarcasm is common, teasing is affectionate, and quick wit is highly valued. Festivals and cultural life. Greeks love a good festival. From the sprawling urban carnival in Patras with its parades and costume parties, To local village festivals celebrating a patron saint or the first grape harvest, there's always something to celebrate. Music and dance are central. Traditional dances like the sirtaki bring communities together and preserve centuries old traditions. And yes, if you're a tourist, people will happily teach you a few steps even if you have two left feet. Cinema, theater, and literature are deeply respected too. Greece has produced famous playwrights, philosophers, and writers for centuries. Ancient tragedies and comedies still influence cultural life today. Even modern Greek films often carry that sense of humor mixed with melancholy, the classic Greek combination of joy and existential drama. And if you think Greeks only celebrate their history, think again. Modern Greek pop culture is vibrant, and youth culture thrives in music, street art, and nightlife, especially in cities like Athens and Thessaloniki. The regional differences. Greece is not a monolith. There are huge differences between the north and south, urban and rural, mainland and islands. The northern regions, like Macedonia and Thrace, have a history of cultural diversity, influenced by neighboring countries such as Bulgaria, Turkey, and Albania. Food is slightly spicier, folk music traditions are distinct, and winters are harsher. The south, including the Peloponnese and the Aegean Islands, basks in sunshine with lighter foods, more maritime lifestyles, and centuries old island traditions that feel almost frozen in time. The islands are another story entirely. Life on islands like Santorini, Mykonos, or Rhodes is slower, sun drenched, and tourism driven, but local culture is fiercely preserved. Villagers often know every tourist by name by the second day of their visit. Meanwhile, in remote villages, you might find life hasn't changed much in decades. Small churches, centuries old houses, and locals who still make everything from wine to cheese by hand. Cities, especially Athens, are a melting pot of all of these influences. Athenians can be impatient, blunt, and politically opinionated, but also generous, witty, and passionate about their city's past and future. Thessaloniki, Greece's second largest city, has a slightly different vibe. Younger, more relaxed, with a mix of Mediterranean and Balkan influences. Then there are smaller towns like Nafplio or Chania, where time seems to slow, and walking along cobblestone streets feels like stepping back centuries. Attitudes and social norms. Greeks can be paradoxical. They are deeply traditional in some ways, respecting elders, observing religious festivals, holding on to family values, but progressive in others, particularly in urban areas where gender roles, politics, and cultural attitudes are constantly evolving. Hospitality is paramount. A Greek will rarely let a guest leave without food, drink, and a friendly argument about politics or philosophy. And yes, you might encounter the classic Greek shrug, tina kanoume, or what can we do? A phrase that sums up resilience, acceptance, and a touch of fatalism in one. Greeks are also famously proud of their history. This pride manifests in debates over ancient achievements, culinary traditions, or even modern contributions to science and art. National identity is deeply tied to language, religion, and historical memory. But this pride is often balanced with self-deprecating humor. Greeks love joking about their bureaucracy, economic struggles, or quirky habits. It's both a coping mechanism and a way to bond socially. Challenges and realities. Of course, life in Greece isn't all sunshine and baklava. Economic challenges have been significant over the past decades. The financial crisis of the 2010s left scars on daily life, from unemployment to austerity measures, and younger generations often migrate for better opportunities. Rural areas, while beautiful, can feel isolated, and some traditions are slowly fading under modern pressures. Yet, Greeks are remarkably resilient. Community, ingenuity, and humor help people navigate difficulties with a kind of graceful stubbornness, a people in motion. Finally, the Greek people are constantly in motion, physically and metaphorically. From island to mainland, north to south, village to city, Greeks move between traditions and modernity. They balance old festivals with contemporary music, traditional food with fast urban life, and enduring history with present-day struggles and triumphs. This dynamic, ever-moving cultural identity is one reason why Greece continues to fascinate travelers, historians, and dreamers alike. So whether you're wandering the streets of Athens, sailing between sun-drenched islands, or quietly observing life in a northern village, you'll find the Greeks themselves are the beating heart of the country. Stubborn, proud, warm, and humorous, they are impossible to ignore, impossible not to love, and impossible not to learn from. And as the sun sets over the Aegean, as the chatter of family dinners fills tiny homes, and as the distant sound of church bells echoes across the hills, you begin to understand. Greece is not just a place, it's a living, breathing mosaic of people. If you've ever looked at a map of Greece, you might have thought someone sneezed while drawing coastlines. The country is a patchwork of jagged peninsulas, scattered islands, and winding mountain ranges that make it one of the most geographically unique places in Europe. In fact, Greece has one of the longest coastlines in the world, stretching over 13,000 kilometers. That's longer than the coastlines of many far bigger countries, all thanks to the endless islands and bays carved by the Mediterranean Sea. It's almost as if Greece couldn't decide whether it wanted to be land or water, so it chose both. Greece sits in southeastern Europe at the southern tip of the Balkan Peninsula. To the north, it borders Albania, North Macedonia, and Bulgaria, while to the northeast, it shares a border with Turkey. To the west lies the Ionian Sea, to the south the Mediterranean, and to the east the Aegean Sea. Surrounded on three sides by water, Greece has always been a country of sailors, fishermen, and traders. The geography practically demands it. The land itself is remarkably mountainous. Around 80% of Greece is covered by mountains or hills, making it one of the most rugged landscapes in Europe. Mount Olympus, the tallest peak in the country, rises to nearly 3,000 meters. In ancient times, this was believed to be the home of the gods, which feels appropriate when you see the clouds curling around its jagged summit. The mountains aren't just for mythology, though. They've shaped the way Greeks live for thousands of years, isolating communities, giving rise to strong local identities, and creating countless natural fortresses throughout history. Because of all these mountains, large-scale farming is difficult. Valleys and plains are limited, so agriculture has traditionally focused on crops that can survive in tough conditions: olives, grapes, figs, and wheat. This is one reason why olive oil is not just a food in Greece, but almost a cultural symbol. It grows in places where not much else will. The geography has essentially dictated the menu. The population is unevenly distributed. About 80% of Greeks live in urban areas, with Athens and Thessaloniki absorbing the majority. Rural villages, especially in mountainous or island regions, have experienced depopulation over the decades as younger generations move to the cities for education and work. Athens alone holds nearly 40% of the country's population, a fact that creates both opportunity and strain. Traffic jams, crowded streets, and smog are part of daily life in the capital, while some island villages are left with only a few elderly residents. The islands are perhaps the most defining feature of Greek geography. Depending on who you ask, there are between 1,200 and 6,000 islands and islets scattered across the Aegean and Ionian seas, though only about 200 are inhabited. Each island has its own character. Crete, the largest, has towering mountains, deep gorges, and fertile plains. Santorini, famous for its whitewashed buildings and blue-domed churches, was literally shaped by a volcanic eruption thousands of years ago that left behind its dramatic cliffs and caldera. Rhodes carries traces of medieval knights and Ottoman rule. Mykonos has become synonymous with nightlife and glamour. Meanwhile, tiny islands like Simi or Hydra move at a pace so slow you'd think clocks are optional. The climate plays a major role in shaping life here. Greece enjoys a Mediterranean climate, which basically means hot, dry summers and mild, wet winters. Summers can be scorching, especially in the southern regions and islands, with temperatures frequently climbing above 35 degrees Celsius. Tourists might find this perfect for beach lounging, but for locals, it's often a test of endurance, especially in cities where air conditioning is a relatively new luxury. Winters are mild along the coasts, but much colder in the northern mountains, where snow is common. This variation means you can technically ski in the morning and swim in the sea by afternoon if you plan it right and don't mind rushing. Nature in Greece is as diverse as its geography. The mountains are home to brown bears, wolves, and wild boars, though encounters are rare and mostly in the remote north. The countryside has herds of goats and sheep grazing on rocky hillsides, their bells clinking like natural wind chimes. Along the coasts and islands, marine life thrives. Dolphins, monk seals, and sea turtles can all be found in Greek waters. The caretta, or loggerhead sea turtle, nests on the sandy beaches of Zakynthos every summer. Locals and conservationists work hard to protect them from the less considerate part of tourism, like beach parties and neon lights. The forests of Greece are equally fascinating. Pine, fir, and cypress cover much of the northern regions, while olive groves dominate the south and islands. Springtime brings bursts of wildflowers across the countryside, and autumn paints the mountainsides in shades of gold and red. Nature here has a rhythm that feels timeless, despite the changes brought by modern life. But beauty comes with danger. Greece is no stranger to natural disasters. Earthquakes are a fact of life, especially around the Aegean Sea, where tectonic plates meet. Some are small tremors that rattle dishes on shelves, while others have historically caused serious damage. In 1999, a major quake struck near Athens, killing over 140 people. Volcanic eruptions, though rare, have also shaped the land. The most famous was on Santorini around 1600 BCE, which some historians believe contributed to the decline of the Minoan civilization on Crete. Wildfires are another challenge, particularly during hot, dry summers. Dense forests, high winds, and long droughts combine into devastating fire seasons, which locals often describe as the most terrifying part of summer. Despite these risks, the land and sea are sources of life and inspiration. The Aegean, with its countless shades of blue, has defined the Greek imagination for millennia. Sailors once navigated by stars across these waters, merchants carried goods between islands, and fishermen still cast their nets each morning. To stand on a Greek island at sunset with the sea glowing orange and the mountains fading into the horizon is to understand why so much poetry, philosophy, and mythology was born here. The geography isn't just scenery, it's part of the national psyche. The Greek countryside is full of hidden treasures. Meteora, for example, is a series of massive rock pillars in central Greece, where medieval monks built monasteries perched on the very tops of cliffs. It looks like something out of a fantasy film, but it's real and still active today. In the Peloponnese, caves like Diros stretch underground with stalactites and subterranean lakes that sparkle in lantern light. The Samaria Gorge in Crete draws thousands of hikers every year, winding through towering cliffs and past mountain springs. These natural wonders remind visitors that Greece is more than beaches and ruins. Rural life moves at a slower pace than in the cities. In mountain villages, locals tend small farms, gather firewood, and live by rhythms that haven't changed much in centuries. Goats and chickens wander freely, neighbors stop to chat in narrow lanes, and life is dictated by the seasons. Island life, while often idealized, is not always easy either. Tourism brings income, but also challenges, like overdevelopment, rising prices, and environmental strain. Yet many island communities cling proudly to their traditions, balancing modern life with the old ways. Urban environments tell another story. Athens sprawls across a basin, surrounded by mountains and open to the sea. Its geography has always made it both a prize and a challenge. The city's expansion has led to problems with traffic and air quality, but it also gives Athens its chaotic, vibrant energy. Thessaloniki, on the other hand, sits along the Thermaic Gulf in northern Greece. Its seaside promenade, overlooked by the White Tower, makes geography feel like a partner rather than an obstacle. Each city interacts with its landscape differently, shaping the experiences of those who live there. The role of geography in Greek history can't be overstated. The mountains once isolated communities, giving rise to fiercely independent city-states like Athens and Sparta. The seas connected these communities, allowing trade, culture, and ideas to flow across the Mediterranean. Even today, geography influences politics, economics, and daily life. Greece's borders with Turkey, for example, have been shaped by disputes over islands and maritime zones. Fishing rights, oil exploration, and navigation routes remain contentious issues rooted in the geography of the Aegean. When you pull back and look at Greece as a whole, what you see is a country defined by contrasts. Rugged mountains and gentle seas, isolated villages and sprawling cities, blazing summers and snowy winters. These contrasts are not contradictions, but a balance that gives Greece its character. The land itself has been both a gift and a challenge, shaping a culture that values resilience, adaptability, and creativity. As night falls over the mountains and the islands, the geography seems to soften. The rocky cliffs glow under the moon, waves lap gently at the shores, and the air cools with the scent of pine and salt. The land that once gave rise to myths of gods and heroes becomes quiet, almost tender. And it's in that quiet that you start to understand why Greeks have always seen their landscape not just as home, but as a companion in their story. If you've ever heard the phrase Western civilization started in Greece, that's not just national pride talking. The land that today is called Greece has been inhabited for tens of thousands of years. And over that time, it became the stage for some of the most influential events and ideas in human history. To talk about Greek history is to dive into a story that includes gods, warriors, philosophers, empires, and of course, a few scandals that wouldn't look out of place in modern politics. The first major civilization here was the Minoans, centered on the island of Crete around 2000 BCE. They weren't called the Minoans at the time, that name was given later, inspired by the mythical King Minos. But they were real people who built complex palaces, including the famous one at Knossos, decorated with colorful frescoes of dolphins, bull-leaping athletes, and ceremonial processions. The Minoans were advanced traders, linking Greece to Egypt, Mesopotamia, and beyond. Then, around 1450 BCE, their society collapsed, most likely due to natural disasters like earthquakes or the massive volcanic eruption on Santorini, combined with invasions from mainland groups. That's when the Mycenaeans rose to power. These were the people who left behind the fortress-like palaces at Mycenae and Tiryns, complete with massive stone walls so big, later Greeks thought giants must have built them. They spoke an early form of Greek and are often linked to the legends of the Trojan War. If you've ever heard the story of Helen, the face that launched 1,000 ships, or the clever trick of the Trojan horse, those tales come from the epic poems attributed to Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey, which were based on events remembered from this period. Whether the war itself really happened is debated, but what matters is how it shaped Greek imagination and identity. After the fall of the Mycenaeans around 1100 BCE, Greece entered what historians call the Dark Ages. Writing disappeared, trade diminished, and large-scale architecture stopped. For a few centuries, life was simpler and more localized. Villages were small, families tended fields, and oral tradition carried stories forward until writing returned around 800 BCE with the introduction of the Greek alphabet, adapted from the Phoenician script. This moment marked the beginning of what we now think of as classical Greek history. By the time writing and organized cities returned, Greece had developed a unique political and cultural structure, the city-state, or polis. Instead of one massive empire ruling everything, Greece was divided into dozens of independent city-states, each with its own government, laws, military, and identity. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and Thebes were the most famous, but hundreds existed, from tiny island communities to major regional powers. This fragmentation might sound like a weakness, but it actually allowed experimentation in governance, art, and culture. Athens, for example, became the birthplace of democracy in the 5th century BCE. And yes, it was a very limited democracy by modern standards. Women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded. But the idea of citizens gathering to debate laws and vote on decisions was revolutionary. The Athenians also invested heavily in philosophy, drama, and architecture. Think of Socrates wandering the streets asking annoying questions, or the Parthenon rising on the Acropolis as a temple to Athena. This was the cultural heart of Greece. Sparta, on the other hand, went in the opposite direction. Its entire society was organized around military training and discipline. Boys were taken from their families at a young age to be trained as warriors, while women managed households and even owned property, which was unusual at the time. Sparta's system produced some of the toughest soldiers in history, and their reputation was cemented at the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BCE, when a small force of Spartans and allies held off the much larger Persian army. If you've seen the movie 300, you know the story, though Hollywood added more leather underwear and slow motion than was strictly necessary. The Persian Wars were a turning point. In the early 5th century BCE, the Persian Empire, which stretched from modern-day Iran to Egypt, attempted to conquer Greece. Against all odds, the fragmented city-states united to resist. Battles like Marathon, Salamis, and Plataea showcased both Athenian naval power and Spartan discipline. Victory over Persia gave the Greeks an immense sense of pride and identity, fueling what became known as the Golden Age of Athens. During this Golden Age, Athens reached its peak under the leadership of Pericles. The city built the Parthenon, sponsored plays by Sophocles and Euripides, and nurtured thinkers like Socrates and later Plato and Aristotle. Greek art became more realistic, science advanced, and political theory flourished. Many of the ideas developed during this time still shape how we think today, from concepts of democracy to philosophical debates about ethics and logic. But as with all golden ages, it didn't last. Rivalries between city-states boiled over into the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta, lasting from 431 to 404 BCE. It was a long, brutal conflict that drained resources, devastated cities, and left Greece fractured. Sparta technically won, but the victory was hollow. Constant warfare weakened all of Greece, making it vulnerable to outside powers. Enter Macedonia. To the north of the traditional Greek city-states was a kingdom often looked down upon as semi-barbaric by the southern Greeks. But under King Philip II, Macedonia became a powerful, organized military state. Philip conquered most of Greece through diplomacy, marriage alliances, and, when necessary, force. When he was assassinated, his son took the throne. That son was Alexander the Great. Alexander inherited his father's disciplined army and had the ambition of 10 kings. Starting in 334 BCE, he launched a campaign against the Persian Empire, and within a decade had conquered an empire stretching from Greece all the way to India. He spread Greek language and culture wherever he went, creating the Hellenistic world. Cities like Alexandria in Egypt became centers of learning, science, and art. For the first time, Greek ideas were not just local, but global, blending with Persian, Egyptian, and Indian traditions. Alexander died young in 323 BCE, only 32 years old, and his empire quickly fractured as his generals carved it into separate kingdoms. But the cultural influence remained. The Hellenistic period saw advances in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, with figures like Euclid and Archimedes leaving legacies still studied today. Eventually, a new power rose in the west. Rome, once a small city-state itself, expanded across Italy and into the Mediterranean. By the 2nd century BCE, Greece had become part of the Roman Republic, later the Roman Empire. At first, many Greeks resented Roman rule, but over time, a curious blend formed. Romans admired Greek culture and adopted much of it, from philosophy to architecture to religion. In a sense, Greece conquered Rome culturally, even as Rome conquered Greece militarily. Under Roman rule, Greek cities remained important centers of trade and learning. Athens was still respected as a place of philosophy, while Corinth and Thessaloniki thrived economically. The Roman period also brought infrastructure like roads and aqueducts, which connected previously isolated regions. Life wasn't always easy, but compared to centuries of war between city-states, the relative stability allowed Greek culture to spread even further. By the time the Western Roman Empire fell in the 5th century CE, Greece had already been shifting into the orbit of the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire. That transition and the centuries that followed would create an entirely new chapter in Greek history. But the foundation had already been laid. From the myths of the Minoans and Mycenaeans to the democracy of Athens, from the discipline of Sparta to the conquests of Alexander, Greece had already influenced the world in ways that would echo for millennia. The first part of Greek history is less about a single unified nation and more about experiments, rivalries, and ideas. It's about how geography created independent communities that fought each other, yet still managed to produce some of the most important contributions to art, science, politics, and philosophy in human history. And it's about how a relatively small land, divided among mountains and islands, managed to project its culture far beyond its borders. When you pause to think about it, that in itself is remarkable. For a place that could fit into the state of Alabama, Greece managed to give the world democracy, tragedy, and comedy, philosophy, geometry, and stories that still inspire books and movies and video games today. And all of that was only the beginning. By the time the ancient world gave way to the Middle Ages, Greece had already lived through the rise and fall of city-states, the brilliance of classical Athens, the wars of Sparta, the empire of Alexander the Great, and the long shadow of Rome. But history didn't stop with the Romans. In fact, the next 2,000 years would reshape Greece just as profoundly, carrying it through empires, invasions, occupations, and revolutions until it finally re-emerged as the modern nation we recognize today. When the Roman Empire split in the late 3rd and early 4th centuries CE, Greece fell under the Eastern Roman Empire, better known as the Byzantine Empire. With its capital in Constantinople, today's Istanbul, the Byzantine Empire was a powerhouse of trade, religion, and culture for over 1,000 years. For Greeks, this era was crucial. Christianity spread rapidly, and by the 4th century, the old pagan gods had largely given way to the new faith. Greek Orthodoxy became not just a religion, but a cornerstone of identity. Monasteries appeared in remote mountains, church domes rose above cities, and the Orthodox liturgy in the Greek language created a spiritual and cultural continuity that would outlast even the empire itself. Byzantine Greece was not all peace and prayer. The region was often invaded by Goths, Slavs, Arabs, and later Normans. Cities were sacked, islands were raided, and whole regions shifted hands more than once. But despite the turmoil, Byzantine art and architecture flourished. Glittering mosaics, golden icons, and massive churches like Hagia Sophia in Constantinople reflected the empire's wealth and piety. Greece was never the center of Byzantine power. That was Constantinople. But it remained an important part of the empire, supplying soldiers, scholars, and spiritual leaders. In 1204, the Fourth Crusade, which was originally supposed to head toward the Holy Land, instead sacked Constantinople. The empire fractured and parts of Greece were taken over by Western European crusaders, forming small feudal states. Venetian and Genoese merchants took control of key islands, including Crete, which remained under Venetian rule for centuries. These occupations brought new influences, especially in art and architecture, but also resentment, as Greeks often saw Western powers as foreign oppressors. The biggest shift came in the 15th century with the rise of the Ottoman Empire. In 1453, Constantinople fell to the Ottomans, marking the end of the Byzantine Empire. Greece soon came under Ottoman rule, a period that would last for nearly 400 years. Life under the Ottomans varied widely. In some areas, local elites retained influence, and Greek Orthodox Christians were allowed to keep their religion under the millet system, which organized communities by faith. In other areas, especially during times of heavy taxation or military recruitment, life was harsh. Greeks were second-class citizens in their own land, subject to extra taxes and political marginalization. Yet, even during centuries of occupation, Greek culture persisted. Villages kept their traditions alive, churches became centers of resistance and community, and folk songs carried memories of freedom. The Orthodox Church played a huge role in preserving language and identity, often running secret schools to teach Greek when the Ottoman authorities discouraged it. At the same time, there were instances of coexistence and even exchange. Ottoman architecture left its mark on Greek towns, and Greek merchants became key players in Mediterranean trade. But the longing for independence never disappeared. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, nationalist movements were sweeping across Europe. Enlightenment ideas of liberty and self-determination began inspiring Greeks too. Exiled intellectuals, wealthy merchants, and secret societies began plotting rebellion. One of the most famous groups was the Philiki Eteria, or Society of Friends, founded in 1814. Their goal was simple: overthrow Ottoman rule and establish an independent Greek state. The Greek War of Independence began in 1821. It was a brutal, messy, and heroic struggle. Rebels rose up across the Peloponnese and central Greece, and islands like Hydra and Spetses provided crucial naval support. Battles were fought in mountain passes, sieges dragged on for months, and atrocities were committed on both sides. The massacre of Chios in 1822, when tens of thousands of civilians were killed or enslaved by Ottoman forces, shocked Europe and galvanized international support for the Greek cause. Romantic writers like Lord Byron championed Greek independence, and Byron himself traveled to Greece, where he died of illness while supporting the revolution. By the late 1820s, after years of fighting, international intervention finally tipped the scales. Britain, France, and Russia sent fleets and forced the Ottomans to accept defeat. In 1830, Greece was officially recognized as an independent nation. The dream of freedom had become reality, though the reality was complicated. The new state was small, covering only part of modern Greece, and its government was unstable. At one point, Greece was ruled by a Bavarian prince, Otto, who became its first king. It was an odd arrangement, and not all Greeks were thrilled to be governed by a foreign monarch. Throughout the 19th century, Greece struggled to expand its territory and solidify its identity. Slowly, through wars and treaties, regions like Thessaly, Epirus, and Macedonia were incorporated. The Ionian Islands were returned from Britain in 1864, and Crete eventually joined in the early 20th century after long struggles against Ottoman and later Egyptian rule. Each expansion brought new challenges, as the state had to integrate diverse populations and rebuild after conflict. The early 20th century was dominated by the Balkan Wars and World War I. Greece fought alongside its Balkan neighbors to drive the Ottomans out of Europe, then sided with the Allies in the First World War. By the 1920s, Greece nearly doubled in size, including much of northern Greece and the islands of the Aegean. But this period also brought catastrophe. In 1922, during the Greco-Turkish War, the Greek army was defeated in Anatolia, leading to the forced population exchange between Greece and Turkey. Around 1.5 million Greeks were expelled from Asia Minor, while hundreds of thousands of Muslims were sent from Greece to Turkey. Families were uprooted, villages abandoned, and cultural ties severed overnight. It was one of the most painful moments in modern Greek history, leaving scars that lasted generations. The interwar years were turbulent. Greece experienced political instability, coups, and short-lived dictatorships. The Great Depression hit hard, and divisions between royalists and republicans deepened. Then came World War II. In 1940, Mussolini's Italy invaded Greece from Albania, expecting a quick victory. Instead, the Greeks pushed the Italians back, delivering one of the first Allied victories of the war. Hitler was not amused. In 1941, Nazi Germany invaded, overwhelming Greek defenses and occupying the country. Life under occupation was brutal. Famine killed hundreds of thousands, resistance fighters battled occupiers in the mountains, and whole villages were massacred in reprisals. When the war ended in 1944, Greece was free again, but devastated. Freedom didn't last long before another tragedy struck. From 1946 to 1949, Greece was torn apart by a civil war between government forces, supported by the West, and communist rebels, supported by Yugoslavia and indirectly by the Soviet Union. It was one of the first flashpoints of the Cold War. The conflict was bloody, destroying villages and leaving deep divisions in Greek society. When the government finally prevailed, Greece was aligned firmly with the Western Bloc, joining NATO in 1952. The decades after the Civil War were marked by recovery, modernization, and continued political tension. In 1967, a group of military officers seized power in a coup, establishing a dictatorship known as the regime of the colonels. Civil liberties were crushed, censorship was rampant, and dissent was punished harshly. Yet even under repression, resistance grew. By 1974, after years of protests and unrest, the dictatorship collapsed following a disastrous attempt to intervene in Cyprus, which triggered a Turkish invasion of the island. Greece returned to democracy, and the monarchy was abolished once and for all. The late 20th century brought Greece closer to Europe. In 1981, it joined the European Economic Community, the precursor to the European Union. This integration modernized the economy and infrastructure, but also created dependence on European institutions. Greece continued to struggle with corruption, bureaucracy, and economic inequality, but living standards improved significantly. By the time Athens hosted the Olympic Games in 2004, the country was celebrated as a modern European nation, reconnecting with its ancient legacy. Of course, history rarely runs smoothly. The 2008 global financial crisis hit Greece especially hard, exposing years of debt and mismanagement. By 2010, Greece was forced into harsh austerity measures under international bailouts. Unemployment soared, pensions were slashed, and public anger boiled over in protests. The crisis defined an entire decade of Greek life, shaping politics and society in ways that are still felt today. Looking back, Greece's modern history is a story of resilience. From Ottoman rule to independence, from world wars to civil war, from dictatorship to democracy, the country has endured repeated struggles, but always managed to rebuild and redefine itself. The past 200 years are filled with triumphs and tragedies, victories and setbacks, but through it all, the idea of Greece has survived. It's not just a story of borders and governments, but of a people who never let go of their language, their traditions, and their sense of belonging. When you stand in modern Greece and look at its monuments, you don't just see ruins of the distant past. You see the echoes of Byzantine churches, Ottoman markets, war memorials, and the scars of protest graffiti from only a decade ago. Each layer tells a story of survival and adaptation. And as much as the ancient world shaped the foundations, it is this modern history that explains how Greece became what it is today. Independent, democratic, proud. and still carrying both the weight and the light of its extraordinary past. If you land in Greece today, the first thing you notice is the sunlight. It has a way of bouncing off the whitewashed houses, sparkling on the Aegean Sea, and making even a cracked sidewalk look cinematic. But modern Greece isn't just a backdrop for tourists chasing Mamma Mia fantasies. It's a country that has lived through crisis after crisis and yet somehow keeps reinventing itself. To really understand Greece today, you have to look beyond the postcards of Santorini sunsets and dive into the everyday lives of its people, its economy, its politics, and its struggles. Let's start with the people. Modern Greeks are around 10.2 million in number, and most live in urban centers. Athens, with its chaotic traffic, ancient ruins peeking out between apartment blocks, and cafes on every corner, is home to nearly half the population. Thessaloniki, Greece's second largest city, has a more laid back Balkan flavor and is known for its food, nightlife, and universities. Outside the cities, life slows down. In villages, especially on the islands, people still know their neighbors, and traditions linger more strongly. The north, with its mountains and cooler climate, feels very different from the hot, sun-baked south. But whether in bustling Athens or a small fishing village, hospitality, philoxenia, is alive and well. If you sit at a family-run taverna long enough, odds are someone will insist on buying you a drink, whether you asked for it or not. Culturally, Greece is a blend of old and new. Religion still plays a major role in daily life. The Greek Orthodox Church remains influential, and major religious holidays like Easter are still the biggest celebrations of the year. Easter in Greece is not just a church service. It's fireworks, lamb roasted on spits, and entire families staying up until dawn. At the same time, secularism has grown, especially among younger generations, many of whom see the church as part of an older world. This generational split is visible in debates over social issues like LGBTQ+ rights, abortion, and immigration. Younger Greeks tend to be more progressive, while older generations often cling to traditional values. The food, of course, is a point of pride. Greek cuisine is not just about gyros and feta cheese. It's seasonal, regional, and deeply tied to family life. In Crete, you might find yourself eating dakos, barley rusks topped with tomatoes, olive oil, and cheese, while in Thessaloniki, bougatsa, a custard-filled pastry, rules the morning tables. Seafood dominates the islands, while hearty meat dishes are more common in the mountains. Olive oil is basically liquid gold here, and every Greek insists their region makes the best. Meals are social events, often stretching for hours, with plenty of wine, ouzo, or chipuro flowing alongside. And yes, plate smashing does happen at weddings, though these days it's more about tradition than drunken spontaneity. Language is another marker of identity. Modern Greek, descended from ancient Greek, is the national language, though regional dialects and accents vary. English is widely spoken in cities, especially by younger people and anyone working in tourism. But if you wander into the countryside, you'll hear Greek in all its expressive hand gesturing glory. There's also a small but important immigrant population: Albanians, Bulgarians, Pakistanis, Syrians, and others, who bring their own languages and cultures into the mix. This has added diversity but also created tensions, particularly during the refugee crisis of the 2010s, when tens of thousands of people fleeing war in the Middle East landed on Greek shores. Now let's talk about the economy. After the global financial crisis, Greece became synonymous with debt, bailouts, and austerity. The government had borrowed heavily for decades, and when the crash came in 2008, the house of cards collapsed. By 2010, Greece was forced to accept massive bailouts from the EU and the International Monetary Fund. The price? Severe austerity measures. Taxes shot up, pensions were slashed, public services were gutted, and unemployment soared, peaking at over 27% in 2013. For young Greeks, it was even worse. Youth unemployment topped 60% at its peak. A whole generation felt like it had no future. The crisis reshaped Greek society. Hundreds of thousands of young, educated Greeks emigrated in search of work, draining the country of talent. Those who stayed often moved back in with their parents, delaying marriage, children, and independence. Protests filled the streets of Athens, with clashes between demonstrators and riot police becoming almost routine. Anti-establishment parties rose to prominence, including Syriza, a left-wing coalition that briefly promised to defy EU demands, but eventually had to comply with more austerity. For many Greeks, it was a decade of humiliation, watched by the world as their country became a symbol of economic dysfunction. Things have stabilized since then, but the wounds remain. Unemployment has dropped to under 11% as of 2025, but wages are still low, and the cost of living continues to rise. Many Greeks feel like they work harder than ever for less. At the same time, tourism has boomed, making up over 20% of the economy. In summer, islands like Mykonos and Santorini overflow with visitors, while Athens has reinvented itself as a hip European capital with rooftop bars overlooking the Acropolis. Tourism brings in much-needed revenue, but also drives up rents and prices, leaving locals squeezed. The irony is that while millions come to enjoy authentic Greece, many Greeks themselves struggle to afford the basics. Politics today is still turbulent, though less chaotic than during the bailout years. Greece is a parliamentary republic, and power has swung between conservative, liberal, and leftist parties. Corruption and bureaucracy remain chronic problems, and scandals regularly make headlines. Yet democracy, which Greeks are understandably proud of inventing, has proven remarkably resilient. Protests are still common, but so is voter participation. Greeks argue about politics constantly at cafes and taxis on TV, but that's part of the culture. It's noisy, passionate, and often messy, but it's alive. On the international stage, Greece occupies a complicated position. It's firmly within the European Union and NATO, but its geographic location makes it a frontline state for migration and security issues. Relations with neighboring Turkey remain tense, particularly over territorial disputes in the Aegean and the unresolved division of Cyprus. Skirmishes over airspace violations or maritime rights are frequent, and nationalist rhetoric often spikes on both sides. Yet, despite the tension, full-scale conflict has been avoided, in part because both nations are tied into NATO and global trade. Meanwhile, Greece's role as a gateway for migrants and refugees continues to strain its resources. Camps on islands like Lesbos became infamous for overcrowding and poor conditions. International aid has helped, but the crisis sparked political backlash, with far-right movements gaining some ground by exploiting anti-immigrant sentiment. Still, compared to other parts of Europe, Greece's far right has remained relatively fringe after the collapse of the Golden Dawn Party, whose leaders were imprisoned for running a criminal organization. Culturally, Greece continues to punch above its weight. Greek music, film, and literature may not dominate globally, but they thrive domestically. Traditional folk music, with its bouzouki melodies, still fills tavernas, while modern pop and hip-hop resonate with younger crowds. Greek cinema occasionally makes international waves, with directors like Yorgos Lanthimos bringing a uniquely surreal style to global audiences. Sports remain a huge passion, football and basketball especially. Olympiakos, Panathinaikos, and AEK Athens dominate football rivalries, while Greece's national basketball team regularly competes at the highest levels. Day-to-day life in Greece mixes tradition with modernity. Cafes are everywhere, and drinking coffee is practically a national sport. Greeks linger for hours over frappes or freddo cappuccinos, often talking politics or gossip. Meals are late. Dinner often starts at 9 or 10 p.m., and nightlife runs into the early hours. Family ties remain strong, with many young people living with their parents well into adulthood, partly out of economic necessity, but also cultural habit. At the same time, technology is reshaping life. Smartphones, social media, and online shopping are just as common here as anywhere else, though bureaucracy still means some things that are easy elsewhere, like renewing documents, require endless paperwork and patience. Not everything is idyllic. Greece faces serious challenges: an aging population, limited job opportunities for youth, and environmental issues. Summers are getting hotter, with wildfires destroying forests and threatening homes. Water shortages are becoming a concern, especially on popular islands. Economic inequality is widening, and many rural areas are hollowing out as young people move to cities or abroad. For all the beauty and history, Greece is not immune to the pressures of the modern world. Yet despite all this, Greeks maintain a remarkable sense of resilience and humor. Ask a Greek about the country's problems, and they'll list them passionately, maybe even angrily. But then they'll shrug, order another coffee, and say, "What can you do? At least we have the sea." There's a kind of fatalistic optimism here, a belief that no matter how bad things get, life is meant to be lived. And when you see families gathered around a table, children playing in the streets, or friends laughing late into the night, you start to understand why. So what is Greece today? It's a country that carries the weight of its past but refuses to be defined by it. It's both deeply traditional and strikingly modern. It's proud, stubborn, sometimes chaotic, often beautiful, and always alive. It has problems, big ones, but it also has something harder to quantify: a way of life that keeps people connected, even when times are tough. And maybe that's the secret. The ruins of the Acropolis are stunning, but the real Greece is in the people who, after everything, still gather around a table, raise a glass, and say, "Yamas," to our health. Trying to predict the future of Greece is a little like trying to predict the weather on a Greek island. One minute the sun is blazing, the next a sudden windstorm nearly blows your frappe off the table. Greece has always been a place of uncertainty mixed with resilience, and the coming decades are shaping up to be no different. Let's start with the economy, since that tends to dominate both headlines and household worries. After years of painful austerity, Greece's economy has stabilized, but it's far from booming. The big question is whether it can break free from its dependence on tourism and shipping. Tourism is wonderful when the planes are full and cruise ships keep docking, but it makes the economy extremely vulnerable to global shocks, like pandemics, recessions, or even climate change. A few bad summers of heat waves or wildfires, and suddenly, millions of visitors may look elsewhere. Shipping is another Greek strength, with Greek-owned companies controlling one of the largest merchant fleets in the world. But it's also volatile, tied to global trade routes and geopolitical tensions. For long-term stability, Greece will need to diversify. There's growing talk of Greece becoming a hub for renewable energy, especially solar and wind. With all that sunshine and coastline, the potential is enormous. The European Union has poured money into green projects, and Greece could end up being an energy exporter if it plays its cards right. Technology is another area of hope. A small but growing startup scene has emerged in Athens and Thessaloniki, with young Greeks trying to turn creativity into business. The challenge is keeping talent at home. After the debt crisis, hundreds of thousands of educated Greeks left for Germany, the UK, the US, and beyond. Getting them back, or at least stopping more from leaving, will be critical for the future. Demographics pose one of the toughest challenges. Greece has one of the lowest birth rates in Europe, combined with a rapidly aging population. By 2050, it's estimated that nearly a third of the population will be over 65. That means fewer workers supporting more retirees, straining pensions, healthcare, and the economy overall. Immigration could help fill the gap, but Greece has a complicated relationship with migrants. The refugee crisis of the 2010s left scars, and while many Greeks showed incredible generosity, others saw newcomers as a burden or even a threat. Balancing demographic reality with social cohesion will be a delicate task. Politically, Greece's future will likely remain noisy, passionate, and unpredictable. The debt crisis fueled anger at traditional parties, leading to the rise of outsiders like Syriza in the 2010s. While mainstream politics has since regained ground, distrust of politicians runs deep. Corruption, bureaucracy, and inefficiency are seen as permanent fixtures of Greek governance. But Greeks also have a strong democratic instinct. Even when disillusioned, they show up to vote, protest, and argue. In the future, expect politics to remain a battleground between older, more conservative voters and younger, more progressive ones. Issues like LGBTQ+ rights, gender equality, and climate action will continue to test the balance between tradition and modernity. Foreign policy is another area where Greece's path forward is uncertain. The long-running rivalry with Turkey isn't going away anytime soon. Maritime borders, airspace disputes, and the Cyprus question will remain flashpoints. Both countries occasionally saber rattle, but neither can afford a real war. Instead, expect a future of tense negotiations, periodic flare-ups, and careful diplomacy. Greece's membership in the EU and NATO offers some protection, but it also complicates things since European and American priorities don't always match Greek ones. At the same time, Greece's location makes it strategically important. It sits at the crossroads of Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, meaning global powers will always keep a close eye on it. Culturally, the outlook is more optimistic. Greece has a knack for keeping its traditions alive while adapting to new times. The younger generation is more connected to the world than ever through social media, global travel, and education. Yet they still celebrate Easter with fireworks, still gather for long Sunday lunches, and still treat coffee like a ritual. In the future, expect Greek culture to spread even further. Greek cuisine, for instance, is gaining international recognition, not just as tasty, but as healthy, part of the Mediterranean diet trend. Greek cinema and music may remain niche globally, but the creativity is there, and global streaming platforms make it easier than ever for small countries to share their art. Tourism, of course, will continue to shape Greece's future, for better and worse. On the positive side, it keeps money flowing, creates jobs, and showcases Greek culture to the world. On the negative side, over-tourism threatens local life. In Santorini, for example, the number of visitors often dwarfs the number of residents, leading to overcrowded streets, soaring rents, and strain on water and electricity. The future may force Greece to rethink tourism, focusing on sustainability, spreading visitors beyond the big-name islands, and maybe even capping numbers during peak season. Done right, Greece could lead the way in sustainable tourism. Done wrong, it risks losing what makes it special. Environmentally, Greece faces serious challenges. Climate change is already hitting the Mediterranean hard, with rising temperatures, longer droughts, and more intense wildfires. Each summer, you'll see news of flames engulfing forests or threatening villages. Sea level rise could eventually impact coastal areas, including tourist hotspots. On the flip side, Greece's natural beauty, mountains, seas, islands, also offers opportunities. Expanding national parks, investing in ecotourism, and protecting biodiversity could both preserve the environment and support the economy. The question is whether the political will and resources will be there to make it happen. Socially, Greece's future will likely be a tug of war between nostalgia for the past and the pull of modernity. Older generations still hold on to the idea of the big family Sunday lunch, the village festivals, and the central role of the church. Younger Greeks are more individualistic, more digital, and less religious. That doesn't mean the old ways will vanish, but they may adapt. Maybe the Sunday lunch happens over Zoom, or festivals get blended with modern music and entertainment. Greek society has always been about blending old and new, and the future will likely continue that pattern. One thing you can almost certainly count on is resilience. Greece has survived foreign occupation, wars, economic collapse, and natural disasters, and it's still standing. The national character leans heavily on the idea of "we'll get through it." That attitude, combined with strong family and community networks, will likely continue to be Greece's safety net. Even when institutions fail, people rely on each other. So, where does that leave Greece in, say, 2050? Probably not a global superpower, but not a failed state either. It will still be a country of stunning landscapes, deep traditions, and complicated politics. It will still argue with Turkey, still depend on tourism, still wrestle with bureaucracy, and still host millions of visitors chasing the Greek dream. The difference will be how it manages its biggest challenges: demographics, climate change, and economic diversification. If Greece can attract back its young talent, embrace renewable energy, and build a more sustainable version of its tourism industry, it could surprise the world. If not, it risks being stuck in a cycle of underachievement. Always beautiful, always important, but never quite reaching its full potential. In other words, the future of Greece may not be about becoming something completely new, but about finding a way to balance what it has always been: a country of contradictions, proud yet humble, modern yet ancient, troubled yet joyful. The ruins will still stand, the seas will still sparkle, and the people will still gather around tables to eat, drink, and argue about politics. And maybe that's enough. Because in the end, Greece's greatest strength has never been its economy, its politics, or even its history. It's been its ability to endure, adapt, and keep living life with passion.